Ladies and gentlemen, the following contest, it is set for one fall. Introducing first, from Motown, he weighs 403 pounds, the Rockmaster, P.N. News.
Everybody say ho! Ho, ho! The posse's yelling ho, cause they know I'll steal the show and burn this house to the ground, rock the beat and hit the sound. Yo, baby, yo, baby, yo! I said, yo, baby, yo, baby, yo!
Welcome everyone to the very first episode of the Retro Wrestling Podcast here at RetroWrestling.com. I almost got it through it. I should just leave it. Yes, the very first episode, and already I am screwing up. And if you hear that laugh, you know who my first guest on this show is. It's none other than Vandal Drummond, Kurt Brown, who also co-hosts the Lucha World Podcast, Slam and Stan Podcast, and who knows, maybe he'll co-host this show if I continue to screw this up. Welcome to the show, Kurt.
Hare Krishna, Fredo. And yes, if anybody out there needs a guest or a co-host who sounds like a laughing hyena on amphetamines, I'm your man. I'm not on amphetamines, but I might sound like I am at times. Thanks for having me, Fredo.
We might have to get on some if this podcast continues to be a wreck. Actually, it's not going to be that bad. So I actually did a couple of episodes on the Patreon called Retro Wrestling Podcast, and I think it was during right around the pandemic when I started doing them. Maybe before that, maybe a few months before that, and then I think we did 2 or 3 episodes during the pandemic where we did the Titanes in a ring episode, 2 episodes of
Yes,
that.
I enjoyed those
you did
very
them over
much.
the phone. And so I thought, maybe I should just make this part of the RetroWrestling.com website and the YouTube channel and just add them to that, available for everyone to listen to. I promise they won't be as bad as the beginning of this episode. But yeah, we have a couple of topics. Basically, the idea is we have a little bit of a format. We're going to talk about one show, maybe just recap, give our thoughts on this show, something from the past, and also spotlight one particular wrestler. It could be anyone from our, past, present, future, current. By future, I mean like somebody who's currently just, it could be somebody like Mini Vikingo who's just starting out, or who's that guy in the independent scene, Nick Wayne, who's just starting out too.
Nick Wayne, who was the son of the late Buddy Wayne and is the surrogate grandson of Moondog Moretti, a very dear friend of mine.
Wow. So basically it's up to, I guess, the wrestler spotlight will depend on who I have on. If it's just me, then it'll be somebody I pick out. If I have a guest on like Kurt, then he gets to pick it out, or we could mutually pick one out. Actually, this week we will be talking about one wrestler that Kurt's been researching a lot, which is Jimmy El Pulpo. And then we will also have a match of the week, which is, I will try to pick out a match that whoever is on can sit through and enjoy. And for the most part, I usually pick good matches. I'm not going to pick a really bad match unless I'm doing it on my own and then I decide to torture myself. And then we will also have one topic, depending on what the guest wants to talk about, or if I want whatever I want to talk about, which, this week it will be talking about something that I have been tortured. If you've been reading the RetroWrestling.com reviews, there is one promotion that I recap that I actually cannot possibly sit through. Actually, I do try to, but it actually takes me longer to watch, which is 1970s WWWF All-Star Wrestling, which is very difficult for me to watch. Kurt is going to explain to me what was going on in the 70s, as he actually did witness this stuff live. Mm-hmm. How he continued to be a wrestling fan, I do not know if he was watching that show. And apologies to anybody who actually grew up watching that. If you did, I think it's very different from... we all grew up watching different types of wrestling.
I like the way Dan Farron put it in a podcast recently that he was a guest on, because he grew up watching that. And he flat out said, yeah, I do turn it on, but I turn it on more for nostalgia while I'm doing stuff around the house, just as background noise, because it reminds me of growing up.
Yeah. I mean, it's and I should say that there were some highlights to the show, but it's probably the most difficult show to watch, especially when you're watching a lot of 80s and early 90s wrestling that is a little bit more, I guess, upbeat as far as entertainment goes. This show, although I have seen a couple 70s shows that actually were, especially if you're talking about championship wrestling from Florida, which was amazing to watch, as opposed to WWF All-Star Wrestling. So we'll be talking about this on this episode. Okay, so the show of the week, the show I made Kurt Brown watch, was Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling September 4th, 1982 show. I made sure I picked a show that I actually enjoyed watching, and I knew Kurt hadn't watched it. I don't think you'd watched it, right?
No, I had not. Okay. Of all the shows I had watched lots of Georgia, lots of Pacific Northwest, a good chunk of Florida. But I have to confess, Mid-Atlantic, I've probably only seen 1 or 2 shows ever.
And it wasn't like it was airing here in California, right?
No, it wasn't. Yeah, but it was tape collector days. Yeah. But for some reason, that's the one that evaded me. And I never really searched it out on streaming services, since YouTube. Until now.
Well, actually, the one cool thing is that it really made it into the WWE Network. And that's really where people have been finding it. And some people post it on YouTube, so more people are able to watch it. But this was actually a really good episode, really headlined by the Jack Briscoe Paul Jones matchup that's on the show. Which, at that point in time, I don't think I had ever seen. My first recollection of Paul Jones was really him as a manager. Never had seen him wrestle before, so. To see him wrestle, was, first of all, that's been a big eye-opening experience. Jack Briscoe, who hasn't really? If you haven't seen him wrestle, you knew he was a really good wrestler. And then there's a lot of stuff available of him, like film footage of him from the 70s.
When I first started watching wrestling in 1972, that was when he would occasionally be on LA TV doing stopovers when they were campaigning for him to be world champ. And, I'm 10 years old. I didn't know a lot about wrestling, and I knew which wrestlers I liked. But there were 2 wrestlers, when I saw them, I said, wait, these 2 guys are different. One was Raul Mata, and the other was Jack Briscoe. I saw him wrestle, and I'm saying, wait, there's something special about this guy.
Yeah.
And this Mid-Atlantic show is no exception. He was always great, but...
For a TV match during that time, it's very... And, it's really interesting that if you look at 1982, it's kind of like there's a period of time where there's not as much strong quality matches on TV. You got every so often you have the jobber who is really good that could actually get a good match out of a star.
Yes.
Just because the star kind of wants to impress everybody on television. But for the most part, you always had like some squash matches or something that was a little bit slower. Around later in 1982, you start getting a little bit more, especially world-class, Mid-Atlantic, Mid-South, you actually would start getting a couple of better matches on
genuine wrestling, because there were territories like Portland where, while they did have their jobbers, you did still see wrestling. Yeah. They were wrestling shows that weren't just like an advertisement for the upcoming house show.
Yeah, they actually, I think they would probably be the one group that kind of...
They were unique.
Yeah, it was
very unique territory. Maybe Houston was similar
really,
too.
Wow, yeah. I think we're probably going to have to do a podcast where you talk about Portland.
Oh, hell yeah.
Because I think that was around the time period you were in Portland, right?
I was very lucky to spend a year in Portland.
What year was that?
80 and 81.
80, 81.
That was...
We'll have to do a podcast on that. So this show actually opens immediately with Paul Jones, who's accompanied by Sir Oliver Humperdinck, beating Jack Briscoe for the NWA Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight title. Prior to this match, Jones had turned heel, and Jack Briscoe claimed that he and Greg Valentine attacked him in a parking lot and injured his leg, which was like that was the heel type of thing back then. Remember?
Yes,
they wouldn't air it or anything. The babyface would show up with an injury or couldn't wrestle, and it was because he was attacked in a parking lot by some mystery opponents.
I was doubled over laughing when they talked about the cowardice of the attack at Jack and Jerry Briscoe, because several years early, Don Morocco talked about this, and several other sources have confirmed this. Jack and Jerry Briscoe tried to attack Ernie Ladd in a parking lot in Florida at the directions of Eddie Graham, but a wrestler snitched on them, so Lad was waiting with a tire iron.
So this wasn't a storyline attack, though.
No.
Yeah.
He wanted him hurt, and instead they got beamed on the head. But no, it was an awesome way to open the show where it just starts off, no long introductions. It's just Jack Briscoe's on the mic, just angry and saying, "I want him in the ring now, even if it means putting up my title."
Yeah, and also at that time he's joined by Jerry Briscoe and Wahoo Mcdaniel, who also talk about how this match is finally going to happen, and they're happy for him. But then Jerry kind of interrupts and tells Jack that the doctor told him he needed 4 weeks to recover, and suggests that he not wrestle Jones so he doesn't risk further injury. Paul Jones was actually in the ring at that point in time, and he yells at them and tells them that Jack had signed a contract, and Jack agrees with him and tells Jerry that he has to wrestle him. Wahoo Mcdaniel then chimed in and said that they all have pride, and he feels Jack's letting his pride get in the way, but he thinks Jack might just beat Jones with one leg because Jones is overconfident. And it's interesting because really, for the most part, prior to this, Paul Jones wasn't really that he would appear on television, but it wasn't like he was this pushed guy at that point in time. He was pretty much kind of like the guy who was the local guy in that territory at that point in time. Usually the guys who were getting pushed as far as the heels were, Sergeant Slaughter, Roddy Piper, Flair when he would come in. Jones was kind of like the next group.
I remember in the mid-'70s, in the aftermags anyways, his presence was pushed to the moon.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. But at that point,
point, this was a little later. He had turned heel, and again, like I mentioned, I only seen him as a manager, and he's just one of those guys. I never searched his matches out. I remember Eric Anderson once telling me just how amazing his heel turn was, and you know me, I'll have to watch it one of these days. Well, when I saw this match with Jack Briscoe, this guy was he was like a chicken shit version of Terry Funk, the way he sold for Briscoe. It was like Terry Funk, only with a big dose of pussy I'm a pussy in it,
And that also explains why he stuck around for so much, in the NWA, the Mid-Atlantic territory, because I think there was a lot of respect for him as far as a wrestler, and as somebody who didn't understand, because as a manager, he kind of wasn't the number one guy. They kind of phased him out.
He never impressed me as a manager. I don't know if I just saw him at the wrong time.
Yeah, so it's like, but now when you start seeing what he did in the ring, it's like, okay, maybe these guys, they had a respect for him and they just wanted to keep him around because he kind of was somebody who had a clue about what to do in the wrestling ring.
Yep.
And like you said, this was an outstanding TV match. At one point, Greg Valentine showed up ringside, which kind of was his way of teasing that he was going to get involved. This ends up leading to, rather than him getting involved, it ends up being Humperdinck interfering.
That was such a great tease, because Valentine comes out, you're expecting him to do something, but you just see him confer with Humperdinck and walk away, and you're looking for something that doesn't come, but still, it worked.
Yeah, and
we should also add that when I say Jones was selling for Briscoe, the story of the match was Briscoe was trying to injure his leg the same way he injured Briscoe.
And that's the other thing, with Jack Briscoe was so amazing in the ring. I mean, you start watching what he could do in the ring. It wasn't this slow-paced wrestler. He was just really fast-paced, very technical, though, and always...
And solid.
Yeah, just
technical, fast, and solid.
If you want to talk about somebody who looks like a wrestler, he's kind of like what you want as far as being a perfect type of wrestler, because he kind of... Just the look, his whole effect of how he was wrestling this match was just... I just thought it was amazing.
And that voice, put a microphone in front of him, that booming voice. I met him once at Cauliflower, didn't have a conversation, but he saw I had a Cauliflower sticker and just said, "Hello, Jack Briscoe." And I just looked at him thinking, if I didn't know he's a wrestler, but I was in a room full of charismatic people, this guy would be the man in the room. The way he carried himself was just...
And Humperdinck was awesome in this one also. So towards the end of the match, Briscoe starts chasing Humperdinck around outside the ring, and he ends up actually when he goes after him, he jumps out of the ring and somehow he lands on a cable or something, and that's what ends up that becomes the selling point of him injuring his leg, and that's how it pretty much falls apart for Jack Briscoe as Paul Jones ends up beating him and winning the title from him. Actually, and it's funny because the finish was basically just Paul Jones punching him. It was like one punch, and that
it was one punch to the throat. Back in the days when a foreign object would knock people out. And, you know, obviously, you know me, I have no problem with modern day wrestling or all the flippy stuff. But I think if you threw stuff like that, like a hold that could destroy somebody, like a punch to the throat should put somebody away. Where today, you know, that gives you a 1 count.
Yeah, you know? A 1 count and immediately back up for a clothesline or. And
I think you can still do all the flippy stuff, but you know, I think you could take a little something from the recipe book from the past.
I actually think that would even help enhance a match, just because something so simple like that, winning a match, that would give you a great heel, and that's one of the things that you don't see nowadays. And we hear this argument throughout wrestling because they mention it all the time in Mexico, how there's no such thing as heels anymore.
Yes.
Rudos. And that's something that a Rudo should be doing. Like that's something that they should cheat to win, you know, find a way.
And it's such an effective storytelling tool. Even if you're, you know, even if you're high spotting all over the place. I mean, it's such a great storytelling tool.
I found it fascinating that this should have been the main event of the show, but it was the match that actually opened the show.
Kind of like AEW does sometimes. Like, they'll open the match with something really strong.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what Mid-Atlantic was like week to week, but boy, that would hook me in right away.
I think that's what they wanted, and it really worked. And the interesting thing is that they pretty much gave you what would be a main event level match on television, which was something that wasn't kind of frowned upon by a lot of promoters during that time period also. You wouldn't want to do that, although around this time is really when you started seeing the change in mentality as far as
it was different from territory to territory also because, you know, we'll talk about WWWF later, but their formula was squash, rinse, repeat, like, you know, send the Cadillac to be slaughtered. But LA, while they would have jobbers, those jobbers would get offense in and sometimes even go over, or they'd get a mid-level. I mean, every territory, and if I remember right, AWA was just kind of a squash.
Georgia had a lot. I mean, Mike Jackson, basically, that was his. Like that's what he's.
That was his calling card.
Yeah, like the fact that they had
Mike Jackson and George South.
They had great jobbers who were always going to look good, and while they weren't going to win, their role was to make their opponent look like the guy who they're building up look good, but at the same time they still looked great. Like it wasn't like this whole like, oh, you know, he's not bad.
They look great, and that, you know, there was a lot of flubs that Mike LaBelle made over the years, but that's one thing is sometimes the jobber would have a day in the sun, and I always thought it would be wise if they put a George South or a Mike Jackson over on like another jobber every couple of weeks just to make it look like, hey, he's in the mix. Yeah. He could do something.
So after this great match, we get a great interview.
Oh, God.
Kelly Kiniski.
What an awkward interview that was, and what an awkward match he had afterwards.
So Kelly Kiniski gets asked about the Briscoe-Jones match, and he talked about having a lot of admiration for Briscoe wrestling despite being injured. He also said he was disappointed to see so many turn and join the House of Humperdinck for the money. But one of the things that... actually, Kurt and I have talked about this off air, was that Mid-Atlantic liked to give a lot of guys opportunities to do interviews. And a lot of times, these guys probably shouldn't have gotten interviews. There's some guys who are really surprisingly really good interviews that probably never got pushed. They were just job guys the whole time. But Kelly Kiniski was somebody who was he never got pushed, but he kind of got a semi-push in some territories just because of who he was. But it was like, he probably shouldn't have never spoken. Like, honestly, I think that might have been his downfall.
No, say, you know, and he was just so-so in the ring, too, but if he was really good in the ring, he's somebody who would have needed a mouthpiece. He would have needed a manager. I actually saw him in Port Arthur in a tag teaming with Larry Lane versus somebody who I don't remember, and Luthez, believe it or not, in 1981.
Yeah.
And it wasn't much to talk about. and
much to this match worth.
Yeah. I mean, Luthez was in his late 60s. This is no disrespect to Luthez, but I mean, just when you talk about how fans back then respected the old people, most of the fans in Port Arthur did not know who Luthez and was wondering why a guy in his 60s was wrestling. While maybe there was 100 people who were going crazy because it was Luthez, like I was. But you could tell that Kiniski wasn't a strong worker. I heard he's a nice guy.
Yeah,
but, you know.
he came across as a nice guy. Probably not the right. Probably kind of forced into the business because of his father.
Yeah,
So-
my sense, without knowing anything about him, he seemed like somebody who was probably doing it, but his heart wasn't into it.
Probably somebody who probably would have fit in more during a different era. Also, I think kind of.
Yeah, that's a good point
Yeah.
too. Like if he's around the 50s or 60s,
Yeah.
it might have been he might have bought it a little more.
Yeah. So he got a match. His match was up next as he lost to Joe Leduc, who was accompanied by Sir Oliver Humperdinck. Leduc was pretty much a beast throughout this match and just
Talk about
ragdolled it.
Talk about leading the match.
yeah, it was pretty much over. You know, it was very, very short. But that's what you want after a big match like Jones versus Briscoe.
Yes, and also I thought that was a clever swerve to interview like the undercard, making you think, oh, this guy might
have a
beat
shot.
somebody. Yeah,
But then you see he's wrestling Joe Leduc, who
because when I was a kid, they rarely interviewed enhancement talent. They would interview mid-carders, but
not
you know,
enhancement talent.
But when enhancement talent was never interviewed, I figured, well, I guess they're never going to win. Nobody wants to hear what they have to say anyway. So
And Joe Leduc, I mean, this was really the prime years of Joe Leduc just because of how he looked so scary. Yeah. Terrifying.
He passed away over 20 years ago, and I'm still scared of him. That just watching him on this.
He's a scary looking guy. So that is then followed by the House of Humperdinck doing an interview where they congratulate Paul Jones on winning the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight title. Jones talked about how Briscoe hid behind Mcdaniel and Jerry Briscoe and was upset that he accused him and Valentine of injuring him. Leduc then adds that Jack Briscoe hides behind his girlfriend, which leads to Jones saying that Jack's girlfriend is probably tougher than him. Leduc reminds everyone he's there to win matches and make money. He warns Valiant again. Humperdinck and Valentine then talk about how many people say that money is the root of all evil and that there are evil people that will do anything for money, and one such person that comes to mind is Abdullah the Butcher, who Humperdinck says he is bringing back to the territory. Valentine then says Abdullah's coming to soften Wahoo Mcdaniel's leg so he can break it again with the figure 4 leg lock. That is quite the cast of characters for that interview segment. Leduc, Humperdinck, Valentine.
Wow.
And Paul Jones, who's actually like, he was really good at that in that interview segment also. But Humperdinck is basically talking about bringing in Abdullah for another bounty. Abdullah had just been there early in late 1981 when Piper brought him in. So he was pretty good back then.
Humperdinck, this was fun seeing Humperdinck in this realm because I saw Humperdinck in 1974 and 75 when he managed the Hollywood Blondes here in LA, and he was much more of a diabolical manager who just talk crap about everybody. Where it was interesting throughout this show, like I know you'll talk about the Greg Valentine versus Mike Rotundo match. He's complimenting Rotundo as like an up-and-coming star.
Yeah, and not only is he complimenting, he's also more cowardly in here also because he's kind of like, he's brought in Joe Leduc because Jimmy Valiant threatened him.
Yes.
So he needs Joe Leduc to protect them. And then he has all these other guys that he keeps bringing in. He's marveling at Mike Rotunda. He's trying, there's constantly guys that they're just trying to find different positions. Between Humperdinck and Slaughter, there's like a lot of recruiting of
he's
of
even
talent.
putting over the guys that are his enemies.
Yeah,
It's like they're making, and I remember a lot of promotions, kind of the heel sometimes would just talk about how incompetent his opponent is, and you're thinking, well, I guess people are going to really want to go see somebody incompetent.
And
of
course, the funny thing is that we're talking about it, and he's bringing in like the most dangerous wrestler during that time period, Abdullah the Butcher.
Yes.
Which it's kind of interesting because if you look later on at Abdullah the Butcher's career, you wonder how he ended up like in some of these territories that had television, just because it's like, he was, for the most part, he was very bloody type of individual and somebody that you would think wouldn't make it onto television.
He was one of those guys who I suspect it worked because he wouldn't stay in the territories for too long.
And he was very much like Leduc, just somebody who scared the shit out of you.
He was scary, and seeing him just doing those elbow drops and seeing how fast he could move with his size.
And that is one of the other things that people don't realize. Like, if you watched Abdullah probably late, maybe 85 to after, very different from Abdullah the Butcher from All Japan, New Japan during the early years and maybe even the 70s where he was a little bit more athletic.
Nobody understands why...
Andre the Giant, same thing with Andre.
Nobody understands why I like watching the Japan match between him and Mil Mascaras.
Oh.
And I love that match because people say, what are you talking about? It was a style clash and they didn't do anything. I said, you're forgetting that both of these guys were high-level judokas.
And Mil Mascaras is another guy that people kind of like are down on. But like if you look at some of his stuff in the 70s and even the early 80s, I think the problem was maybe the style clash was an issue, but when he was in there with somebody who knew how to take a bump, which is basically all the person needed, he could do his head scissors, monkey
Jack
flips.
Briscoe cited Mascaras as one of his favorite opponents ever. He said it was a night off wrestling Mascaras. But he and Mascaras, they weren't shooting, but they were having fun. You could, if you watch that match, you'll see they're having fun testing each other's balance.
Yeah.
And,
Well, now after seeing Jack Briscoe versus Paul Jones, I mean, who doesn't want to see more Jack Briscoe?
Oh, hell
Briscoe?
yeah.
I mean, he's awesome. So after that interview segment, we get Greg Valentine, again with Sir Oliver Humperdinck, beating Mike Rotundo after 2 elbow drops. This was actually another pretty good match, despite Rotundo losing. Humperdinck admits to being impressed and suggests maybe he'll sign him someday, which actually ends up being a storyline where he's trying to recruit Rotundo, and Rotundo kind of just doesn't want anything to do with him.
Interesting.
I think it might have been in Florida where he finally joined with them, or I don't think he did. I don't think he ever did. Might have been the end of... No, I don't think he ever did, right?
I do not know.
Yeah, I don't think he did. I think he joined Sullivan in the Varsity Club. That's probably the first time he went full on heel.
I believe you're right, and I loved when he came into the.
I think by that point, Humperdinck was Big Daddy Dink, with the Freebirds. so I think actually
I love Rotundo's entrance when he's in the Varsity Club.
Yeah. That's another great gimmick that's been forgotten. So then after that, we get Sir Oliver Humperdinck back again and he's talking about how it's one of the happiest days of his life because Paul Jones won the title. Joe Leduc will make sure Valiant doesn't get his hands on him, and he believes Wahoo Mcdaniel's days as U.S. champion are numbered. To Greg Valentine, who's going to win the title. That is also then followed by the next match, which is Roddy Piper and Wahoo Mcdaniel. I think that's probably why Briscoe Jones works as the first match, is because they're closing out with Piper and McDaniel's a tag team. Although they're wrestling the Gladiator and the Medic, who they easily beat. Pretty much a squash match.
In fact, did the Medic actually get in the ring?
I don't think he did.
I think it was all...
And that's one of the things, Wahoo was a little bit more contained, more controlled, but Piper was just just wild. He just
It was actually a cool combo, because I agree with you, because there was something fun about just seeing Wahoo who's being merciless but very calculated, where Piper is just chaos.
Poking his eyes.
Yes.
What people don't realize, Piper was a heel for much of the year, and then I think it was during the summer, I think they turned babyface in Georgia, and then he turned babyface around the territories.
Well, people like him and Moondog Maine before him, I think one of the or Jackie Fargo type. I think what made them work as babyfaces was they didn't change.
Yeah, they were still doing the same
they didn't
thing.
say, "Oh shucks, I want to wrestle clean now."
Yeah.
They were crazy, but they were crazy for the right side. They were crazy, for the fans instead of evil.
It worked. It worked
great.
Yeah, and even in the closing interviews, he even brings up something that he did as a heel. Which why would you bring that up if that's you're a babyface now?
Yes.
So we have closing interviews. That was another cool thing about Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, is that they always closed out with interviews. Jack Briscoe shows up, and he's upset that Humperdinck and Jones were so proud of what they did, and reminds everyone that he was in the ring defying doctor's orders. But he said it won't be an excuse for his loss, and he vows revenge against Jones. Wahoo Mcdaniel then brought up how there's a lot of people out to get him, and admitted that last year Abdullah the Butcher hurt him so bad that they couldn't even show it on TV. Roddy Piper then closes by saying he's wrestled with Jones and Jack Briscoe, and Jones couldn't tie Briscoe's shoes. He also reminds everyone that he was the one that brought Abdullah the Butcher to the territory last year. Kind of maybe he's involved. But I thought this was a fantastic show.
It was excellent. It had quality entertainment that you can enjoy for the moment, but also moved the story along and makes you not only want to watch next week, but would make you want to watch... these Titans clash when it's that big house show.
You want to see what's next between Jones and Briscoe, but at the same time, you also know there's the Greg Valentine, Wahoo Mcdaniel issue. You got Piper. What's going on with Piper? That closing, I don't think they made a big deal about that closing thing where he talked about he was the last guy who brought in Abdullah the Butcher, which I think could have been a little bit of a, I think that they could have teased something like, hey, maybe he's going to, you can't trust him.
Oh, that's always a good
But they
good
kind
angle.
of, I don't think they really went that far with it, but...
And you never
they had a lot of heels, too.
And you also never know. Plans do change. They might have been thinking of it. I do remember there was an angle. I didn't actually see it myself, but somebody's telling me there was an angle where they were teasing a Mr. Wrestling 2 heel turn in Georgia, and then they just dropped it.
I think he did turn heel, though, right?
In Mid-South.
Yeah.
But, this is one where they had a most popular wrestler contest, and he would say how I'm sure I'm going to win it. And instead, Tommy Rich, who was Georgia Wrestling back then, won it. Oh, I did see the post interview, though. I did see a few weeks later when he came out and says, I want to talk about, Tommy Rich winning. He says, I might have sounded a little cocky, but I really did think I was the most popular. And something like congratulations. But it did feel like they were going to, and I wonder if they just thought, nah, it won't work, or who knows what they were thinking.
I mean, to me, I just thought this was a fun show.
It was a very good show.
A lot of good interviews, and Joe Leduc scaring the hell out of me.
Me too.
I love Joe Leduc, and I was a huge fan of his stuff. I always wondered what he could have been if he would have been given a better opportunity, or if somebody saw more in him. But at the same time, you always all these guys always have these weird issues, so you never.
There is. You never know. Maybe he. There's issues like maybe he didn't get along with people. Maybe he went again. You never know if somebody has issues. Well, wrestlers, a lot of, like we said before the podcast, there's wrestlers who have issues, but then there's ones who it gets in the way of their work, and they have to. One of the most common things I see just on Facebook and Twitter is, why wasn't was Power and Glory, was that the Roma and Hernandez tag team? Hercules Hernandez said Paul Roma was so good, why wasn't he pushed? And I understand what they're saying, but I've read multiple wrestlers
that was a fun
saying,
tag team too, but it was
and I like Paul Roma, but I've read multiple wrestlers saying he was a bitch to work with. He wasn't. He
was a horseman too, and everybody complains about that. So maybe you don't want him to.
Well, apparently, I think at least one of the I think it was Ric Flair hated him being a horseman because according to Ric Flair, this is according to Flair is when it was time to go on, he was just kind of doing like playing cards or something like that when it was time to go to work and stuff. Who knows if that's true? But I've heard multiple wrestlers just say he wasn't always the most professional guy, and no matter how talented you are, if you don't play well with others, sometimes it can bite you. Some people can get away with it, some can't.
Yeah. Well, this week's Wrestler Spotlight is a wrestler that actually could get away with it. Actually, we don't know. I don't really know. I picked out... Well, actually, I guess I picked him out because I figured you were doing research on him. Figured it'd be easier for Kurt to talk about the person he's doing a lot of research on, Jimmy El Pulpo, who I would assume the majority of people listening to this podcast are not that familiar with. So you could tell us a little bit about him.
I do believe that not only am I the president of the Jimmy El Pulpo fan club, I am probably the sole member of the Jimmy El Pulpo fan club.
And I think you have a Facebook page for Jimmy El Pulpo.
I do. Well, what it is it's called the Pulpo Pages of Journeyman Wrestler. So anybody on Facebook, if you look the Pulpo Pages, that's Pulpo, of Journeyman Wrestlers, it's a tribute just to the journeymen of the territorial era, going all the way back to the beginning of time, to the end of the territorial days. And who knows, you might even have a good definition of a journeyman after the territories are dead. Think of a Jerry Gray or a Bobby Blaze. They might fit into a category like that. And Pulpo is one of those guys who just captured my imagination in the early 90s when I saw an issue of Boxy Lucha, who had their call Bienvenidos al Pasado, Welcome to the Past. Yeah. They had some really fun nostalgic articles.
And you know the cool thing about those is that a lot of times you'll find a lot of information on them. Also, like I think
Yes.
there's one on Murcielago
Velasquez.
and it pretty much is his profile. Like it's like you could get so much information off of it.
And the results they would have sometimes. Sometimes you'd have results from the 1930s. Just
My favorite thing is that they've been like I think it's Boxy, might have been Arena Boxy Lucha or Boxy Lucha. There's two different, for those listening, there's two different Boxy Luchas. One's Arena, the Boxy Lucha. And the other one's Boxy Lucha. And one of them was doing chapters on the best memorable moments in El Santo's career. So they actually, I think there's like, I don't even know. I think the last one I saw was like in their, like 19, like, it's probably in the 1970s. And they were like chapter like 75 or something like that. Just kept doing chapters of that. And you learn a lot about El Santo, which that's different. It's El Santo, but it's like it's cool to find all this information that you're finding out.
I've said it a million times, and I'll probably say it a million more times. Wrestling journalism in Mexico was light years ahead of any country. Any country. There's kayfabe, but they had their dumbass moments.
They were bad at typing names. Let's be honest. They couldn't spell.
Oh God, yeah, no, they weren't.
couldn't spell.
They weren't perfect. But that's the same just with, if you look at wrestling advertisements in the newspapers throughout the 50s to the 60s in this country, like half the names were misspelled even in main events. I mean, it's part of wrestling. But no, they were, everybody used to tell me how great the Japanese magazines were. And then I remember Fumi Saito, when I was with Meltzer in Japan, he said, well, most of the results are correct, but it says a lot of them are written before the matches actually take place. A lot of people write these magazines don't even watch the matches.
Oh, wow.
But they were older guys who thought, well, when Inoki was young, it was great, but now I don't want to watch these youngins. But so they did a feature on Jimmy El Pulpo, and what piqued my interest was they said he left Mexico and went to California, and we never heard of him again.
How long was he in Mexico? Like wrestling, not
he was just maybe 2 years. He was there at the dawning of the Luderoth promotion. He was
when they were bringing all the
foreigners,
the Mexican Americans who were considered foreigners going to
Charo Aguayo, who was a Mexican American, and El Pulpo was one who was born in Aguas Caliente, 1908. And he was one of the homeboys who was really in the mix, sometimes main eventing, usually somewhere in mid-card. Initially wrestled under his name Eugenio Munoz. And in 1937, he moved to California, wrestled Northern California for the first probably 3 quarters, and occasionally El Paso, Arizona. But the more I've researched him, even before contacting any of his family, I could see that his main dream was to live in the States.
Oh, okay.
A couple of the guys who started with Salvador Luderoth in the 30s, Luis Mayo is another one who actually was a main eventer for Luderoth, and another wrestler named Alberto Corral followed the same suit. They moved to California, never looked back.
Wow.
Well, Pulpo was a really tall guy with these long, lanky arms and legs, and Pulpo means octopus, as I'm sure Fredo knows, but probably not all the listeners
And I think that's why they gave him the long, lanky arms, probably
exactly
more of the whole octopus thing.
Yeah, and his first, before he came to the Los Angeles territory, he was trying to sell himself as a Rudo with mixed results. Sometimes it sounded like it worked. Other times people said, nah, he just looks like he's kind of imitating, the other Rudos. When he went to L.A., it's an interesting question. Would he have been a main eventer for several years? Or was he meant just to be a mid-carder? And, I'm not big on hypothetical questions, so I won't try to answer it, but at the same time, the questions are interesting because he did get a main event push in 1937 and 1938 in Los Angeles, but a combination of the climate for wrestling at the time, as well as some unfortunate mishaps, really, make it a what-if question.
This is like going back to the whole Joe Leduc thing where we talk about the what-ifs with him.
Exactly.
You just don't know because there's so much more that goes beyond.
Yeah, and he had
beyond the wrestling ring. There's obviously not just within wrestling. There's the political
absolutely
backstage talk and all that. But then the personal life also. Wrestlers have they have similar issues to the rest of us.
Exactly. They're they're like us. Some of us have their act together. Some don't.
Yeah.
Now, Pulpo, he, when you're talking about political issues, oh boy, you couldn't have been given a major push at a worse time than Pulpo did. One of the sad things about the wrestling business, or if you want to look at it this way, the sheer stupidity of even the most brilliant wrestling promoters, is you're in Southern California, which... let's put this in perspective. It was 1937. Less than a century ago, California was Mexico, part of Mexico. And, you had, you did and still do have a huge Mexican population, Latino population.
They didn't push him.
Well, this is the thing. Before Pulpo, they pushed Vincent Lopez, who was a Mexican-American... I'm blanking on if he was actually born in Idaho or Iowa, but Mexican-American like we were talking about earlier. And Lopez was a huge box office success for the promoter Lou Darrow, who was a very, very good promoter, very successful promoter, but also a very unscrupulous promoter. Up there... I bet you.
So he was basically just a promoter.
He was wrestling. He was a typical
wrestling promoter.
I would say if historians came up with a top 10 list of
shady promoters,
the shadiest successful promoters, he would probably. Yeah. I don't know if he'd be in the top 5, but he would be up there. He. Then again, if you read the history of LA politics and Vice back then in the 1920s and 30s, he probably wasn't nearly as bad as the rest of them, but that's another story. So Lou Darrow made a lot of enemies in the time that he promoted, and Rock Ribbons will slap me for forgetting when exactly he began promoting LA. I believe it was mid-20s. But by 1937, his demons were catching up to him. He ran afoul of wrestlers. He ran afoul of the Athletic Commission. And he ran afoul of competing promoters who he would work with, but try to... Joe Malkowitz, who ran up in San Francisco. I think he was just starting at that point. I'm not sure. But he was just stacking up a lot of bad karma, and he also began having health problems in 1937, and so, nice brother that is, he turned over his promotional duties to his brother Jack, and Jack Darrow was the new promoter. Well, what a nice brother to hand over promotional duties when it's hitting the fan. I mean, he was having numerous legal problems. So in addition to being an unscrupulous wrestling promoter, he was a terrible brother. He basically gave his brother a terrible hand to deal. And on top of that, Jack Darrow was not quite the promoter that
his brother
was. But his brother did know that it's good to have a valuable Latino star, and so he put Pulpo as kind of built him up to be a draw like Vincent Lopez. And he did draw respectable numbers. There were, Olympic Auditorium held 10,000 people, and, there were times even, with people like somebody he wrestled frequently was a guy named Nick Lutz, who was a long-time California wrestler. They drew like around 8,500.
Well, that's not bad.
Yeah, and there were somewhere he would draw 7,000. I think the lowest those first couple of months was 4,500. So
That's not good.
yeah, that's not good. That's not good. So it sounds like he was a mix, but
No.
at the same time, he was not going to be the next Vincent Lopez. On the other hand, they valued him enough that they put him clean over former champion Gus Sonnenberg.
Oh, wow.
And that's where the research into Pulpo gets interesting, because similar to how old school people will deride the Young Bucks today, Pulpo had a flashy style that a lot of the fans took to, and even a number of the sports writers enjoyed. But there were detractors who, at least one of the sports writers was a traditional journalist who just thought, he's just this wacky clown. And the reason is his long limbs were kind of his gimmick. He would take guys down with his legs and put them in all sorts of complicated...
an octopus. He's
An octopus,
yeah.
exactly. In fact, he made famous... I think there's another wrestler who used it prior, but he made famous the octopus hold, which today is the hold Inoki is famous for.
Yeah.
And that he had two versions of it. He had the Inoki version, which was a submission hold, and he had another version where he worked it into a pinning combination. The rolling cradle that you would see Terry Funk, and I believe it was Manami Toyota who would do that, where they
roll around. Yeah.
Yes. I always forget what the name of
La
it is.
Reca. La Reca. It's a Mexican move.
Oh,
When
okay, yes.
They spin around, right? La Reca.
Exactly.
It's called La Reca.
So essentially, Pulpo was probably introducing some
Lucha. He probably brought that from Mexico.
Exactly.
Because that's an old Mexico hold.
Yes.
And that's the move I always forget the name, and it's like, oh, I don't remember the name.
And the funny thing is, I know I heard the English version of the name,
Yeah.
but I
think the English version is like the I think they gave it to the Oklahoma something, the Oklahoma roll or something like that. No,
that sounds right.
something like that.
That sounds right.
And I think it's that, but I know it as La Reca, and that's one of the things that I always have issues with. Is like I'll remember a hold in Spanish, but I can't remember it in English, or vice versa.
Yeah.
But
And now that I'm 60, I realize I'm forgetting all this
Yeah.
stuff that I should remember and need to start writing down so I don't forget it again. But in going into 1938, they were continuing his push, and he had one injury that was attributed to Chris Zaharias of the three Zaharias brothers.
no,
And that was interesting to research because he did indeed injure his wrist. It was a fracture, but he actually fractured it the night before his match with Chris Zaharias, because there was a mudslide on the Roosevelt Highway in Santa Monica Canyon, which this was part of a storm which is considered one of the worst natural catastrophes in Southern California.
Yeah.
Well, Munoz Pulpo was doing volunteer rescue work and fractured his wrist during the rescue efforts.
Oh, wow.
And the very next day, he and Chris Zaharias got into the ring in Ventura and did a 2 out of 3 fall match that just went no more than 5 minutes, where he beats Zaharias the first fall, gets beaten in 30 seconds. You know, he beats Zaharias in like a little over a minute, then Zaharias beats him in 30 seconds, and then Zaharias intentionally throws him out of the ring twice, fracturing his wrist. So they did a storyline. That's the earliest example I know of a storyline injury. I know it's not the first, but it's one where the heel was trying to hurt him out of
Did that end his career, the wrist injury?
No, and it's amazing.
He came back.
It didn't, because he came back in May, and at that time there was an Olympic athlete named Dr. Patrick O'Callaghan, who was a gold medalist in the 32 Olympics and possibly 28 Olympics too. And while he did have some amateur wrestling experience, it was track and field event. The hammer throw was what he was famous for. And we've all heard this story. There's a celebrity, an athlete, and wouldn't it be a great idea to turn him into a pro wrestler?
Oh, jeez.
They had big plans for this guy.
Yeah.
They put not just in Los Angeles. This was a nationwide thing. They were going to push this guy to the moon. Well, it was a bad idea. The smart thing they did is, sometimes when they were investing in people, like, say, a world champion, you probably heard this, how they'd have the champion put down some money as, like, a trust in case they ran away with the belt. They would have... I'm blanking on the word, like a
deposit.
A deposit.
Yeah.
That the promoters held on to in case you tried to do something cagey, which was very smart of the promoters. And whatever plans they had for him, I don't know. I don't think it was world champion, but they did have him put some deposit down. Well, his first match was against Jimmy El Pulpo in Los Angeles, and they came up with some finish for him called the hammer throw. And I will tell you, before I even knew the story of this match, I saw a photo of the aftermath, and I saw Pulpo laying there holding his arm, and I say that is not a storyline injury.
Oh.
Yeah, this guy...
Re-injured him.
And he was on the shelf for a few more months. And O'Callaghan was a guy who did not play well with others, and forgive me for going a bit off topic, but it is part of the story. They continued to push this guy, even though he didn't know his head from his ass in the ring, and was very scornful about the other wrestlers. And to show how dumb sports writers were, I mean, I think we can all agree sports writers back then knew wrestling was worked.
Yeah.
And they approached it differently. Some actually would approach it respectfully. Some just kind of like would report it and nothing else. And some would kind of, make snide comments about the wrestlers. Well, they were praising Callaghan up and down because, look, he's a real wrestler. He injured this guy, so it shows their ignorance. Well, Callaghan, or O'Callaghan, I should say, I guess continued to not make friends. And we had a wrestler here named George Coverly, who his nickname was K.O. Coverly. He was a former boxer. And when doing research, Luthez put him over as somebody you didn't
want to mess with.
Did not want to mess with. Well, he was booked to wrestle O'Callaghan, and I'm assuming the plan was for O'Callaghan to go over, but instead, Coverly just, first Coverly taped his fist and then soaked them in cold water. And, I'm not a fighter, so I don't, but I guess that was a dirty trick fighters would do. They'd soak it in water, and then when it dried, it gave it more oomph. And for 20 minutes, he just beat O'Callaghan into oblivion.
Damn.
And sports writers were making comments like, well, we usually love those wacky grunt and groaners, but we saw something a little unsettling tonight. Like, and they described his face as looking like ribbons. And some historians, like Greg Oliver and a few other people, have written about that, and they write that was his last match. But no, the promoters did
still continue.
They tried to continue for a while.
Yeah.
But then O'Callaghan, his son got sick, and he went back to Ireland all of a sudden. But here's what's interesting as I researched that, and his son conveniently got sick a few nights before he was supposed to wrestle a fellow named Fred Grubmeyer, who, again, Luthez described as somebody who looked goofy as hell, like Ichabod Crane, scrawny, but they used him because he was the promoter's policeman.
Wow.
And he could make life hard for you. And after his treatment from Coverly, and then somebody must have filled him in on who this Grubmeyer guy was. So anyways, that put another complication in his career. But they did have a rematch with Gus Sonnenberg later that year, where, again, he went over Sonnenberg. And it should be said that Sonnenberg's career was winding down. Sonnenberg was, if you see old matches of Sonnenberg from, like, around 1930, that guy was great to watch. Very talented.
There's video of him.
There is video of him. There's... In fact, this is what's ironic about people calling Pulpo, just flashy and wacky and not a traditional wrestler. Their first match, one of the storylines was Sonnenberg was known for creating the flying tackle. Which is funny because you're talking about traditional wrestling, the flying tackle. Well,
you would think a football player coming in would have done that.
Yeah, exactly. and well, maybe he
might have. I mean, I'm sure
he might have been a football player.
Might have been somebody that did. Yeah, I think he might have been.
Showing my ignorance of his. But it gets interesting because the story of one of the falls of that match was he would run at El Pulpo with his flying tackle, and El Pulpo, being so tall, would just leapfrog over his tackle. But eventually he nails Pulpo and gets one fall in, even though he puts Pulpo over in the end. And it's, funny, one of the sports writers was ridiculing that when actually that was a staple of Sonnenberg's matches. His opponent would leapfrog over his...
Because you don't want it.
Yeah, going back to 1930. Yeah. I saw one match from 1930 where that was part of the storyline. And then when World War II came, Pulpo really scarcely wrestled for about 2 years when he joined the Merchant Marines. And, he was getting a little bit older. Well, not old, but it's pretty clear he wasn't going to be a main eventer. And it also seemed like, other than California, the only times he wrestled were for short stints in other states, usually a working vacation type of thing. And I got to talk. I finally contacted.
How long did he end up staying in wrestling?
He stayed until his last match was 1949. So it began in 1934. And me, the reason I'm so fascinated with him is because I'm fascinated with journeymen. I've always has been since I was a kid, and that's pretty much the type of people I want to write about, and he's kind of my flagship journeyman. And I actually made contact with one of his daughters, and she said he's one of these guys, when he left the business, he just didn't look back. And per my hunch, he was somebody who wanted to live the American dream. He raised his daughters and son in Fresno, eventually moving to a nicer area up in Redding, and pretty much became kind of like a blue-collar Renaissance man. He was somebody who was really into hunting, fishing. He liked to do leather work, very involved in the community, one of these traditional strict Catholic fathers, but it sounds like he had his...
Sounds like he had a good life.
Yeah, lived into his 80s. And
the fact that he got to wrestle and got out of wrestling lasted till he was in his 80s, so...
That's why I'm intrigued with journeymen. Yeah. I mean, you'll hear a dearth of stories, but I tend to hear more stories of journeymen who know when to get out.
Yeah, like...
And he stayed active in sports. Yeah. Like, he loved boxing, and his daughter said one of the best gifts she got from him was he taught all his kids self-sufficiency, to take care of themselves before they were out of high school even.
That's good.
And that's possibly because she said he ran away from home around 13 or 14.
That's something very common back in that.
Absolutely.
A lot of people were living
that happened all the time.
Depression, the Great Depression.
Yeah,
and all that.
Yeah, but but it was wonderful to talk to her, and of course, I've been around enough to know when I was researching him, I said, okay, be prepared. You might learn that he was a colossal prick, but no, he sounded like one of the okay guys. He sounded like an interesting guy too. His daughter Lorraine was extremely kind with her time, and it always does feel good to hear of a wrestler who got out of the business and just kept on going. I mean, somebody who had a very active life and just...
And enough information to have a chapter for an upcoming book?
Yes, absolutely. If you don't mind me talking about that for a few minutes, well, you know,
plug. You got to plug away. Although you don't have anything yet. You don't have anything yet. Just potentially something.
Well, as I said last time, you know, originally,
and this was the reason. This was the reason I mentioned Jimmy El Pulpo, because I thought, you know, let's start with something that you're researching. You know, you could plug your upcoming project.
No, thank you. You know, last time I did a podcast with you, I spoke about how originally Rock Rims and I were going to do a book on Latino wrestlers in California. And he is neck deep into his Ray Stevens biography, which I am biting at the bit to read. Rock is one of the best historians out there. But, you know, he's spending a lot of time on that, so he said, you know, I really have to back out of the Lucha project. So I was gonna do that project. Well, but believe me, my confidence isn't so great where sometimes I think, oh, I should just not do this. Who am I kidding? No, this is going to wind up being two different books. I want to do a book on the local lucha community here in Southern California that you and I know. Yes. The people we know, Superboy, Triton, Frankie Lima, all those guys. And while I was going to do something on the history of Latinos in California, well, I'll still feature a lot of Latinos in the book. I really want to just focus on the journeymen in California.
Which isn't just Latinos. It's
yeah. I think of all the people that I saw, like, you know, Mickey Doyle, Tony Rocco, and, you know, going back to the 30s
Cool
and 40s.
Cat.
Cool Cat.
Are you going to look for Cool Cat information?
I would like to find that.
Was it Superboy? Is the only one? Superboy's the one that brought him up, right? Cool Cat.
That was one of Superboy's heroes. Yeah. Very tragic story.
Yeah. I saw him listed on results.
Oh, did you really?
Lucha, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out if it was him. I can't remember when I saw it, but I saw it listed. I don't know if it was me finding it or it was something that the Cubs fan posted on his Lucha database. But it said Cool Cat. I'm like, oh, Cool Cat. Yeah. I think I might have been searching through the Lucha database.
Yeah, wrestled briefly for LaBelle. Is that the ice cream guy going by outside?
Yeah.
It's kind of nice because we don't have the sound of the train tracks in the background anymore.
No,
and some of the ambience here in Walnut Hills is not what it was. But no, Cool Cat wrestled briefly for LaBelle as Cool Cat Clark. He's a guy named Charles Clark. Very athletic guy. I didn't get to see a lot of him. Saw some of him in LaBelle, but by all accounts, Superboy says the place to see him was at Hadco Plaza, where he really shined. And he was one of those guys who was at the wrong place at the wrong time. He was in the liquor store after working out at LA Community College, and there was a drive-by, and just... I mean, they weren't shooting at him, but he was in the store. The bullet went and it paralyzed him. Oh. And I remember going to a Hadco Plaza show in '82 where, you know, my Spanish was even worse back then, but it said something about a tribute to Cool Cat.
So he survived it?
He survived it, but when they brought him out, and it was Superboy's dad who brought him out in a wheelchair, and he was paralyzed, and
that's sad.
You know, that was hard to see. You know, he looks like he couldn't talk much, and the local boys stayed in touch with him, but they said just one day he just moved and left no recording address. There's no.
You'll have to go by word of mouth.
Exactly, that's what it is.
I mean, some of it is like that.
I mean, I know what his name is, and I know there was a issue of Lucha Libre that did a profile on him where it might have some stats where we could see if we could find something. I mean, that's the great thing about the internet age is
you'll find a lot of information.
Oh, sites like Ancestry.com, newspapers.com. It's just amazing the stuff that you can find these days.
And that's what you're using for your book, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know,
I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, my idea of like stuff is like current, you know, 1970s forward, but like you're going back to like the 1930s.
And 40s. What
40s.
Surprised me is one of the
even worse because it's a lot of Latinos, and you know, Latinos. It's very like if you want to learn stuff about people in Mexico, sometimes you can't even find like their date of birth or stuff because they have multiple birth certificates.
Oh, too. Exactly, or no birth certificates. In fact, I was talking about that subject with Pulpo's daughter, and she said her mother was born literally on the side of a road.
Wow.
And there was this, like, no papers saying what day she was born.
Yeah.
And same with Superboy's father, El Moro. He wasn't sure what his exact birthday was.
Yeah, my grandmother, for the longest time, we celebrate her birthday in December, but apparently there's a possibility that it was in February.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, okay.
Not uncommon back then.
Yeah, so that should be fun. I guess we should get to the next topic, which I made Kurt. Actually, I didn't even tell you to watch it. I didn't tell you to watch it. It was just me being curious about it. And that is WWWF All-Star Wrestling from the 1970s. This has been the show that has tortured me. It's not like... I mean, I'll watch almost anything. And first of all, it's just 1 hour, which basically condensed without commercials is basically 45 minutes. Sometimes I'm so happy because there's technical difficulties because this is 1970s footage. Some of the video may have been lost. And we end up getting a 30-minute video.
Yes.
Which, I mean, for somebody who likes to watch everything, it's kind of sad. But what I wanted to know, because I'm watching it now, present time, and I grew up more watching wrestling in the mid-'80s forward, but somebody who actually watched wrestling in the 70s and actually getting to watch WWWF wrestling during that time, did you find it as boring as I did? As I do now.
It was a mix. So here's the thing. I first saw WWWF TV in 1975.
And was it All-Star Wrestling?
Yes,
yes. That was the show they were...
I believe it was called All-Star Wrestling. But it was the same thing. Just like the Mid-Atlantic show we talked about, it started off with music that I'm sure there's some guy who made music for the 70s. 70s porn flicks who wants some residuals for that. It started off with some really bad music. But one of the... this was before VCRs, so the only thing... you had to compare to LA Wrestling, or I had to compare to LA Wrestling, was whatever TV would make it here to California. And while no other TV would last for more than a year or so, still, it was a great place to live because UHF stations would just magically receive... TV from some far out place, like in 1977, just lo and behold, on Sunday nights, they had a half-hour All-Japan women's wrestling show. That's the first time I ever saw, like, the beauty pair, Jackie Sato, Maki Ueda. One night on Channel 18, when it was a Spanish station, and I was just surfing, I wasn't even looking for anything, there was wrestling from some town in Mexico. The only name I can remember was America Salvaje, one of the coolest masses.
Yeah, it was good.
One of the Escobedo family. Were they out of Guadalajara? I'm not sure.
Guadalajara.
Yeah. And
notice that, Lucha, I'm really good at answering.
Thank God. Because you're saving me from looking like a complete fool, because I have to say, I believe he was from there.
Yeah.
No, but... And one of the real treats was... Channel 34, which aired the Los Angeles Wrestling Show live on Wednesday nights, and then they'd rerun it Saturday mornings. Well, every now and then, unannounced, and I couldn't see any pattern to this, they would air, unannounced, one of the Friday night wrestling show main event shows.
Wow.
The 1974 Battle Royal show that Black Gordman won. One Sunday night, I was about to go to bed, and parents were really strict. Bedtime was 8:30, but I had to stand up to them because, for some reason, Channel 34 on Sunday night was airing the entire Battle Royal show.
There's kids listening to this show, and they're probably like, 8:30? What's up?
Oh, you should have. Oh, back then, a lot more parents.
Now they get mad if they get sent to sleep at 11. Like 11, it's only 11.
Oh, yeah. Most kids I knew, there was supper time, bedtime, and you didn't, you didn't try to deviate from that. But no. So California is a great place to, if you were like this crazy obsessive.
I will say though, if I was watching WWWF All-Star Wrestling at 8:30, I would probably be asleep at that point.
Very good point. So, yes, which brings me back to 1975 summer. late night, Channel 34 aired WWWF TV. Now, I was really excited because...
Did you know at that point who was in that promotion?
Oh, yeah. I was a whore for the magazines, and I was intrigued by the different territories.
Sammartino and all these other guys.
Yeah, exactly. And I was excited to, see these guys. And that's, I had already realized that not all wrestling promotions are created equal, because I watched Roy Shires regularly because my mom lived up in Northern California at the time, so I saw them regularly. But this really was so different from anything I had seen. I had never seen something that, looked more like an infomercial.
It was very laid back because you only have Vince McMahon doing commentary for the most part, although you do have...
occasionally,
early on, you had Argentina Roca. Who was... I actually thought he was great.
Oh, he was fun.
He was so, like... He didn't care. Like, I think he must have had a really good relationship with the McMahons, where he didn't care, and at certain points he was talking about the most random stuff when he would, like...
Exactly. It was just...
there was one time where he was talking about how he had to take off his shoe because
yes!
And it was like... And McMahon is just like... You could, like, suddenly just hear silence, and then McMahon's like, well, Argentina Rock is busy taking off his shoe.
That was a regular thing, apparently. I didn't see it all the time, but I remember some people back east said sometimes he'd even get in the ring and take off his shoes and get comfortable, then go sit down.
And then there was like... he would ask him, "Hey, Argentina, what did you think of the match?" All right, back to you, Vince.
Exactly.
Like he just ran.
Well, that's the funny thing, because he had at one point he tried to run against the McMahons, and there was some bad blood. I'll say a lot of things about Vince Jr., but it sounds like Vince Jr. liked Rocca.
I think he probably grew up with that group.
Yeah,
Rocca,
well, he loved Dr. Jerry Graham.
And the Grahams, and those were the big draws then, Miguel Perez. So
yeah, exactly. So they, well, and as we know, wrestling enemies are made. But
he had a soft spot for those people.
Yeah, and Vince Sr. was still, steering the ship, so I'm sure he forgave and forgot, because, they kind of gave him some work, because, he didn't really save his money, Rocca did. But, no, it was weird, because... It was like I had never seen wrestling where half the jobbers look like wrestlers, but the other half look like they just got off work at the gas station.
Like they came over, they were offering $50 for anybody to come into the ring and just lose. And they're like, yeah, I'll get in. Well, I don't the equivalent of $50 back then, maybe like $10 back then or $5.
I actually heard that while... I might be wrong about this, but as I recall, the WWF wrestlers, when they wrestled in big towns, they got paid well. But the enhancement talent actually got a little more money than the main talent did for the TV tapings. I do know that to be a fact when, in the 80s, when WWF would come here, the people I knew, like Stephen De Leon, Louis Spicolli, and those guys, they always got $100 for getting squashed on TV. And, like Dynamite Kid said... The wrestlers got $50 for that. Of course they didn't. They made better money in other towns, but they had an odd way of doing, and it was just so strange to see. I think I was used to seeing jobbers who
looked a little more in shape.
Yeah, and there were some guys who wonder. Well, we do know the story of John Arezzi sneaking his way into being a jobber for a TV taping in 1970. Yeah, no, this is true. He was not a trained wrestler, but somehow he talked his way into a match, and he can tell you by his own account.
Mistake.
Yeah, Dusty Rhodes did.
Oh, it was Dusty Rhodes?
It was a tag team match, and Dusty Rhodes did give him a real bionic elbow.
Yeah.
But there were, most of the wrestlers looked like they had training, but there were some guys where... Oh, I remember seeing a match with Kevin Sullivan where he whipped a guy in the ropes and the guy just fell ass backwards out of the ring when he hit them. I mean, the other funny thing I remember is, was very low rent as far as finances.
Yeah, it was a very, it looked like when people talk about a barn. Like people, like remember the old a place where
the smoke-filled arenas, and
this is what it really felt like.
And I mean, I love that atmosphere, but there was,
I like the ring announcer though, like the
ring announcer before Joe McHugh was a
Joe
guy named
McHugh.
Buddy Wagner, who was every bit as good as Joe McHugh.
Yeah, Joe McHugh was.
Buddy Wagner had a voice like this,
Yeah.
To my Mr.
gotta bring
Fred
that-
Balassi.
We got to bring that back.
Oh, definitely. I mean,
I think the whole atmosphere of it, like the slower matches, the wrestlers were so slow. Like the I don't even know.
Very
like,
dead matches.
Yeah, very dead matches. And
very one-sided.
if there was one wrestler that was really good, it was so noticeable how much better this guy was. Like Kevin Sullivan. I mean, his matches were.
Yes.
He was a little bit more upbeat. I think it was because didn't he start in Florida? Or I don't know where he started.
I don't know where he started.
I can't remember where he started,
honest.
but he was in different places. But you could tell he wasn't the same as the guys that were working there.
Oh, exactly. Same with if you saw Rick Martel. I remember.
Oh, Crusher Blackwell, another one.
Oh, when I saw him do a drop kick,
Yeah.
I about fell out of my chair. And
They show you Crusher Blackwell, then they go to Baron Michael's.
well, in fact, that's what I'll never forget is. In 77, they started airing it on Spanish TV again. And like I said, it was random. It's not like WWF was coming to town. It's just they put it on TV for some reason.
Yeah.
Well, it was a special night because Bruno Sammartino was going to wrestle on TV.
Yeah.
And, it was a good selling point. They kept him off TV. It was like you had to go to the big arenas to see Bruno. But every now and then...
They did that with Hogan, too, early on, remember?
Yes,
He was
yes,
on.
exactly. Well, on this night, it was exciting because Sammartino was going to wrestle at Cicluna, and I saw Cicluna sell for punches that didn't connect.
Yeah.
And it was very different because it's not that you never saw that, but yeah, you'd see a little more of that on WWF TV. Like when, who's the tag? Gino Brito, and was it Dominic DeNucci? It was like an Italian tag team who held the straps, I think in 78. They had some finishing move where they would leap off the top and hit the guy in the chest with their butt, like they'd land on their feet.
Yeah.
But I remember the times I watched, like a quarter of the times, the butt wouldn't even touch the chest, and the guy would sell it.
Yeah.
Another time, Victor Rivera when he was a babyface, was wrestling some guy and finished the match with 3 drop kicks, 2 of which didn't connect, and the guy sold like crazy.
Yeah, it's very...
It was very different, but it worked. It worked.
I think the early stuff, like when you talk about like, because there's not a lot of footage available, like on the.
Mm-hmm.
They had it previously on network, the WWE network. Now it's on Peacock. Mm-hmm. But like the 75, 76 stuff isn't as bad. It's the later stuff as it keeps going.
Yeah.
I think 78 sort that 78, 79 is kind of like where it's kind of gets a little rough. Then I think once other guys start coming in, once it gets to the 80s, I'm sure it all changes like in wrestling. But
there was one in 83. It's before they started using, really quality jobbers.
yeah.
I remember the jobber's name even. It's the only time I ever saw him, and again, I wonder if he's a guy who was able to talk his way in the dressing room. A guy named Paul Fisher against Sergeant Slaughter, and he takes off his shirt, and you just saw a guy.
This guy just comes out.
Oh gosh, he's a skinny guy but was soft and just looked depressed. He looked so depressed, and it was so bad that Vince started laughing during.
Oh jeez.
He says, "Here he comes with a Cobra Club." But every now and then I'll mention that match. And every now and then, somebody will say, "I remember that." And even Danny Davis, referee, was saying something to Slaughter like, "What are we working with?" Yeah, I have no idea what he's saying. But
I think the best thing out of those shows from the 70s is the interview segments.
Grand Wizard.
Again, Vince McMahon does very much what Bob Caudle did, where it's like, for whatever reason, they had to stretch out the interview with the person. And sometimes, like, you kind of were like, okay, like, he would talk to Tony, like Dino Bravo, who's got a thick accent.
Yeah.
And he would keep going, and it kind of was a little bit, okay, that could be rough. But when he had Grand Wizard, Superstar Graham, Ernie Ladd was fantastic, too.
Ernie Ladd was a genius.
Yeah.
Ernie Ladd was a wrestling genius. That's putting
one of the better matches I've seen on that show was Ernie Ladd versus, I think it was Pete Sanchez.
Oh, he was great when he was going over enhancement talent.
Yeah, and he was winning, but he made the guy look good. Like,
to this day, when I was a kid, he was the only heel that ever scared me because his MO in LA in '72 was he had his taped thumb as for an injury, And so he's wrestling these guys half his size. And, yeah, he could beat him right away. But he would torture them by jabbing them in the throat. And they'd spit up blood. And I would get scared every time I saw him. But
we don't get that as much nowadays. Like, I think the last person that did that was Terry Gordy. Remember when he did the whole Asiatic
yes,
spike?
the Asiatic spike.
Yeah.
Well, and
bring back the Asiatic spike.
bring it back and make
the
it
claw.
deadly.
And the claw.
The claw, definitely. With WWF, that was WWWF. I will say the highlight for me, and I was even aware of it at the time, was I waited just for the Grand Wizard interviews.
He was great.
He was better in my. Oh God, I love Blassie. Being a California boy, I love Blassie, but Wizard ruled over all of them.
And they had many. They had Blassie.
They had Albano
and Wizard and
the holy trio of evil managers.
Yeah,
the unholy trio, I should say.
I think what I liked about Blassie was him insulting the people in the crowd.
that was great. Well, what made me a lifelong fan of the Wizard. I think this was when they were airing it in 1977. The people are booing him like crazy, and it's just an interview with him. He's not hyping one of his wrestlers. He's just getting
talking about whatever he's
he's just talking about what an awful person he is.
Yeah.
And McMahon says could you listen to yourself? Listen to these people. They hate you. And he says, well, the idiots who hate me are the same idiots who put Richard Nixon in the White House. And I never heard anybody say anything remotely like that. And I just said, this guy is gold. Awesome. No, he's my all-time favorite of the manager, even over Bobby Heenan. And I know
my downfall for the point that I reached where I had to just talk about this show being so bad came recently. I was watching a six-man tag. The heel team is a bunch of big dudes.
Yeah.
I think one of them might have been Baron Cisluna and
Silvano Sousa.
Yeah, and some of the other guys. But the babyface team is Brisco, Tony Garea, good guys.
Yes.
And Haystacks Calhoun.
Of course.
So this is the last match on the show. Zabisco and Garea, when they get in, they're doing their thing. They're trying. They're putting in some work. Actually, Garea is really good. I will say that he was really good.
Yes.
Haystacks comes in. Hot tag. Haystacks Calhoun. Walks in. Whips the guy. Slowly whips the guy. Lifts up his elbow. The guy runs into his elbow. Falls down.
Big splash?
No. He goes over. Tags out.
What?
And that's it. And I was like, my God. Haystacks Calhoun, that's all he did. And he probably got paid pretty well to do that.
Oh, no, he did. No, he was in a... Well, that's what was funny is... When I was a kid here in LA, I would see them hyping Haystack Calhoun to come in for an appearance, and the Sheik, but you wouldn't see him on TV, and I wondered, why don't they show them on television? And I realized that's why. You don't want to show too much of them, because they're an attraction, but you don't want to...
The attraction is that they're big, and they're going to do very limited, and what they do limited isn't very good. So it's like... Yeah, we got.
When they finally did show the Sheik on TV in '74, I started watching '72. I don't know if they showed him, previous. My older LA fans could tell you that, but they. It was when he was feuding with Pompero Firpo, and they had him wrestle, one of the veteran jobbers, Lou Anthony, a very talented jobber. But what the match was the bell. I don't even know if the bell rang, but. Sheik just throws fire to Anthony. It misses, and Anthony falls. And the referee sees the fireball, too. And the Sheik pins him. And I thought, oh, this is the guy that I'm supposed to be scared of. And I know...
But that does sound kind of awesome that he threw fire at him.
But it missed. Like by a long shot. It didn't even come close to touching him. And that's all he did. Yeah. And now But
if it would have been near him, you would have been like, "Holy shit!" Like that's awesome.
Yeah, maybe the heat got his eyes, or you could explain it away.
Yeah.
But that's when I started realizing, oh, this is why they don't show some of the guys on TV and keep them on. I mean, I didn't know that right away at the time, but as the next,
that's got to be hard. Like first impression, that's what it is, and that's why you don't get as like Sabu.
Yes.
Sabu, I mean, imagine your first impression of Sabu is him missing, like, slipping off the ropes and not going through the table.
Yes.
Because he did that a few times.
Absolutely.
He struggled. Whereas, if you saw him the first time and he actually did his move, you're like, oh my god, this guy's awesome.
Yeah.
So...
And you know, the Sheik, you know, in fact, anybody out there wants to read a great biography by Brian J.
Did you finally
Solomon's-
get it? You finally got it?
I finally got it, but I read it on Kindle first.
Oh, okay.
It is, even if... Okay, I was not a Sheik fan. I'm still not a Sheik fan. But this is one of the best biographies I've read in years. Not just wrestling biographies.
Wow.
This talks about his parents immigrating from the Middle East. In fact, I wrote Brian Solomon and told him, like, wow, even before the Sheik was a wrestler, I'm more interested in the story about his family.
Yeah.
And this is... Brian Solomon is a guy who... similar to Rock Rims, has great admiration for the Sheik, but it's not a hagiography where he's just praising him up and down. He and you know, the Sheik, he was gold in Detroit. I mean, that formula worked, and he was a big draw here in LA. But it's interesting when you talk about a Sheik or a Haystack Calhoun, you realize why they didn't overexpose him on TV.
Yeah.
It takes the shine off. They... You know,
I'm still waiting to find I don't know if they're on video, but a match between the two those two guys that all I know about the Mcguire Twins. All I know
There
is.
Oh no, they make Haystack Calhoun look like Super Astro.
Just because of the photo of them riding motorcycles together.
Oh, that famous photo when they had the cowboy hats on.
Yeah.
I've
never seen them wrestle yet.
I do know some people who actually worked with them who said you couldn't meet two nicer people.
I'm sure. They probably were.
There's. I think you can still find footage of them in Japan.
Oh wow!
Oh my god, it's not
pretty.
It's not. No, they. Yeah, that was their style. You know, the one big man that I remember really fondly, who was a Haystack Calhoun knockoff, but I thought was much better, was Man Mountain Mike.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, he was here in late 73 through early 75. This guy was, he was a babyface for the first year and a heel for a few months. This guy did the big man gimmick. You know, didn't do much more than Calhoun, but he was a great babyface and a great heel, and he was great on the mic. He wasn't just a big man. He actually was somebody you could watch every week.
That's cool.
And there was a reason to do it. He had a great TV match with Ernie Ladd, where Ernie Ladd bloodied him up. And, you know, whoever the cameraman was got the perfect shot, because it's in the TV studio. And you see Man Mountain Mike turn around, and his face is covered with blood, and he has this look of rage on his face. And it's in back of Ernie Ladd, and you see Ladd backing off and putting his hands like, calm down, calm down. Ladd was great at that.
Yeah, Ladd was awesome. For a big guy
man.
being cowardly, he was awesome.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's... So we talked about horrible wrestling, of course, being WWWF All-Star Wrestling from the 1970s.
Yes. Well, also, quickly, and I'll be really brief, but you talked about Tony Gurria, because I did watch a little last night. They actually had a match with him and Nikolai Volkov on one of those shows from 78. 10-minute draw. That was very entertaining, the two of them.
And that's the thing. There is some entertaining matches, but it's like the atmosphere of the show kind of makes it very difficult.
And the following match was Dino Bravo versus Joe Turco. He put a headlock on Joe Turco, and I turned the channel.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We went through some bad wrestling with some good mixed in. We opened the show with a good match, Jack Briscoe versus Paul Jones. And now we will close out the show with the match of the week, which I think you might have seen before, right?
No,
you haven't seen?
I concluded watching Japan wrestling, not because it wasn't good, but just because I was so...
You just didn't have time.
Yeah, I was so ensconced in lucha in the early 90s. That was what I lived, eat, and breathed as far as watching wrestling. But I saw Kobashi when he was first starting out, but I did not see his rise, and I did not see this match. I pretty much concluded watching men's wrestling in Japan around 91. I want to say 91, 92.
So this match actually features somebody who actually made it onto WWWF All-Star Wrestling, Stan Hansen.
Yes! Oh my god.
This is Stan Hansen versus Kenta Kobashi from July 29th, 1993. I think Hansen had previously already wrestled Kobashi a few times, but this really was the match where they just, the right moment, Hansen was still at that age where he could still be taken seriously.
My God. Now, here's the thing. Now, correct me if I'm remembering wrong, but what I remember about Hansen in the 80s was he was a big monster. He sold, but he did not sell a lot.
And he sells really well, too.
Oh, my God. He bumped like crazy for Kobashi.
Yes.
He was the one who won the match, but he put Kobashi over like a superstar.
That pretty much...
suplex that Kobashi gave him.
And that's basically 1993. Kobashi, that pretty much was the year that Kobashi got elevated, because not only after this match, he ends up working against Dr. Death Steve Williams, and that's actually that is actually the match that everybody kind of like talked about more, because I think that's the one where he dropped him on his head or something. I think
that's what I remember most about Kobashi, is not actually seeing him, but it was late 92 when I was on one of the AAA shows, and one of the Hanna brothers, I was saying, how is Japan wrestling these days? It says, well, if Kobashi lives through the next year,
it's going to be amazing.
He'll be amazing. But they said he's a one bad neck injury away.
And he's still around, which is one of those rare things. But yeah, him versus Hansen, like you said, it's the suplex, all this, just a rough, like just the power in this match. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about a vertical suplex, but a guy like Hansen made it look like something. This little, I remember Hansen just steamrolling the Funks, and the Funks having these desperate comebacks, and just, he's this machine, and here he is. He was bumping.
He was the one that was getting beat up. Very early on, he was getting slapped around outside the ring. He was getting slapped, getting DDT'd
and it
on
was
the floor.
So convincing too. Yeah. And I forgot how great I always knew how great Hansen is, but it just reinforces.
When you start watching more Hansen, I actually watched the 6-7 minute clip of him when the match that supposedly he broke Bruno Sammartino's neck.
Yes.
It's like a handheld type of thing. I couldn't see when he broke his neck, because I think that didn't make video. The fact that Sammartino, if he supposedly broke his neck,
he did. Yeah. It was just a mishap.
Yeah. He continued. He continued in the match, and what is on video is actually the continuation, and they were fantastic. Like Sammartino, I could see why people like.
Oh, me too.
Very good.
Sammartino was awesome,
but Hansen was awesome, and the more you watch of Hansen, the more you see like just the violent nature that he had, the way he could carry himself as being so violent. If you see him wrestling Kobashi, it's basically what you're going to see him against the Funks or an enhancement talent type of wrestler. It didn't matter who it was; he was going to make you look.
I know there are wrestlers, but fans who would think this is sacrilege. But if I had to pick, who am I going to watch a lot of, him or Brody?
It's Hansen.
It's Hansen.
Yes.
What I remember of Brody is he was Brody, and it was the Bruiser Brody show, where Stan Hansen was the monster, and he did destroy people, but he made them shine.
Yeah, and he could sell also. He could sell for, like, if it was necessary to sell for, like, if he's wrestling Kobashi or Bob or Jumbo, he's going to sell for that person, but he still scares the crap out of you, because he's going to get you with the lariat. And that's pretty much what happens in this match. What I dug about this is the finish. Probably the best finish in a match I've ever seen, where they're in the corner and Hansen is just beating the crap out of him and headbutting him, and Kobashi's like going back at him as well, and then Hansen just lariats him off of the top rope,
off the top turnbuckle. Yeah. Yes, that was beautiful.
Yeah, I just thought that was awesome.
What like we were talking about earlier, like the Rock's elbow. It's always nice to have this. Hold that as toxic. That's gonna just put somebody away.
And it's kind of cool that Hansen, like, you think he's gonna get it one way, and he found another way to get you with that. Kobashi being on the top rope.
One of the things I loved about All Japan Pro Wrestling, and also the women's pro wrestling, is not everything was a super climax. Sometimes people will get a pin not out of nowhere, but like I didn't picture that being the finish.
Yeah.
When he went to cover him, it looked cool. And I said, it's a finish that worked.
That had to be a finish because it was so cool. Like
it was very cool. But same with the Japan women in some of the mid card bouts. Sometimes somebody would snatch a cradle and pin somebody out of nowhere. That's always good because you never know what to expect. You picked a great match. That was really, really enjoyable.
I think this is probably like the third or fourth time I've watched this match in the last year, just because people keep asking me to do their podcast. I did a podcast with Dylan that was his best matches of he's been doing the best matches of the 90s. Mm-hmm. And this was one of the top 10 in the 93. There
is a fun match of Hanson's to watch. I want to say it was 1985. I don't know if it's on YouTube or if you could find it. There was a tag team tournament. If memory serves, Hanson was teaming with Ted DiBiase for the tournament.
It's probably available then.
Yeah, well, they were wrestling Jesse Barr, and I want to say...
I think I've seen
it. The cameraman was given a day off that day because when the finish came and Hanson took Barr, put him against the ropes, and made the signal that he was going to give him the clothesline, he throws him into the ropes, and there's a Japanese fan in the background who picks up a big American flag and starts waving it while Barr comes off the ropes. And Barr sells that clothesline like he was killed. Wow. I mean, the way he sold it, that's just... It's so funny. The rest of the match, I don't even remember much.
Yeah, but it's just the finish.
Yeah, that was such a photogenic finish that,
I think, to me, Hanson has to be one of the all-time great wrestlers. Like, even if you're, as far as being a big guy, I think just because of... Not only did he come across as a big guy, but he could actually work with anybody. Like, you could put him in there and he could make it work.
He understood what the business was about. I remember reading, this was 10 years ago when I read it, Bill Watts' autobiography, so I don't know
how accurate.
I don't take what I say with a grain of salt because I don't know how accurately I'm recalling this anecdote, but he said when Brody and Hanson were tag team champions in Mid-South, I think it was very early on.
That was early. That was
this was late 70s, yeah.
I think early 70s. I think it was before he went to maybe
my timeline
might have been late 70s. It's somewhere in the 70s.
I want to say it's late 70s.
Yeah.
But they had to get the belts off them. I can't remember why. So Watts picked two junior heavyweights. I kick myself for not remembering one. He's not a real memorable name to a lot of wrestling fans, but people in that region probably would remember him. But the other one was Danny Hodge.
Oh, wow.
So, according to Watts, he
wanted to make sure they lost the belts.
No, apparently he went in there saying, oh, you're going to drop the belts, and Brody was like, they're too little, it's not believable. But Hanson understood, that's okay. According to Watts, Brody had pay a little penance to Danny Hodge for, always wish those matches were taped. I love Brody. I love watching Brody.
I'm a big Brody fan. I mean, a lot of his stuff still stands out right now.
Hell yeah, it stands up.
Yeah, it's just the there's a big difference between him and Hanson. Hanson just was phenomenal. Everything.
Oh yeah, because Brody is great, and he was more in business for himself.
Yeah.
And that's not a knock. I mean, that's part of what his appeal was. But Hanson was somebody who, would just, from where I'm watching, looks like he was trying to get the show over, as well as himself.
And this match between him and Kobashi kind of felt like it was a passing of the torch, as it was. Kobashi was slowly starting to move into
similar to Jumbo Tsuruta and Misawa.
Like not necessarily like him passing Hanson, but it was more like, hey, you belong with the big boys now.
Yeah, this guy can get in and scrap.
And then obviously then he ends up going with the whole Kobashi Misawa versus Kawada Taue tag matches that everybody raves about.
It's textbook. It's textbook wrestling. Yeah. Like if somebody wants to get the idea of booking a feud or booking a storyline. Baba did it nice and gradually. Yeah.
Well, Kurt, it's been fun.
It's been a blast
having you on this first episode. Probably going to be on every episode.
Will I be the perennial guest?
I hope everybody enjoyed the show. If you want more, you could visit us on the, retrowrestling.com, luchaworld.com, patreon.com/luchaworld, where we have additional content available.
And it's great content. Check it out.
Yeah, we got Lucha Magazine write-ups, some DVDs that you could download at the $5 reward tier. And you could also check out the YouTube channel, Retro Wrestling YouTube channel.
Worth the money. You will get some.
It's free. The Retro Wrestling
history.
YouTube channel is free for,
Oh, I was talking about the Patreon.
the Patreon, not Patron.
I always do
Patreon.
that.
I know. What
Patreon.
was a Puma? Remember, you say Puma differently.
Puma.
Don't you say Puma?
Puma?
Puma.
Yeah.
I thought you say Puma.
People always
Puma King.
People used to tease me when I was a little kid because I always said, "Oh, my Aunt Mary is coming today." Oh, your aunt. And I'm like, what's wrong with that? And I didn't realize it's because my mom was born in New York, where you say aunt instead of aunt.
Yeah, I get that with guitar.
Oh, no way!
Whatever reason people say I say it differently, and I'm
It sounds more like sitar the way you say
guitar.
it.
I'm like, what is the?
I never noticed that.
Yeah, and I was like, people started telling me that. I was like, I don't know. It's like I'm not going to say that word anymore.
I'm one of those guys who pronounces like Spanish words very like gringo nerdy.
Yeah.
One because I just took basic Spanish classes, but two because my dad knows some Spanish, but he pronounced them to a T almost ridiculously. I'm sure he probably got teased about that a bit, but
And I should mention, this is the first podcast that Kurt has been on, and I think Negro Navarro would be very pleased to see this. Kurt Brown is no longer the man holding the recording device, as we have a stand holding it.
we're coming up in the world.
We're moving up. We're moving
Yes.
up. So,
Yes.
I hope everybody enjoyed the show, and we will be back again soon.
Yolanka bless everybody.